Hello comrades, you are watching RedIvan Military, and today we'll talk about uniforms and equipment of the Soviet paratroopers during the final years of the war in Afghanistan. But before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel and subscribe to my Instagram. In this video I will show an average representation of the Soviet paratrooper. I based it on some photographs of the 345th Parachute Regiment from 1986 to 1988. However, this is not strictly tied to any particular unit. Uniforms and equipment that I will show you today could be seen in more or less any Soviet airborne unit of that time. And let's start with uniforms. More precisely, headgear. During the later stages of the Soviet-Afghanistan War, there were two primary summer headgear options: the Afghanka cap and the 1974 pattern boonie hat. This was already a third generation of such hats in the Soviet army. Interestingly, in official documents, they were initially referred to as tropical helmets. Although it was beloved by the Soviet troops, the shape of this boonie hat is pretty awkward, and it is hard to fit it properly. Some bent the brims to make it look like a cowboy hat, others folded the top, while others tried to flatten it completely to give it a more acceptable appearance. Now take a look at the buttons on my boonie hat. No, it is not a fake, not a replica, and not post-Soviet production. This particular boonie was produced in the Soviet Union for advisors operating in the areas they were not officially supposed to be, and for foreign cadets of the Soviet military academies, and it differs from the standard Soviet boonie hat used in Afghanistan in two ways. First, sanitized unmarked buttons without Soviet emblems, and lack of the standard Soviet military stamp. It only has a quality control stamp and the size stamp. It is a very rare piece of the Soviet equipment, and actually I received it by accident. I ordered the standard Soviet boonie hat for this video, but the seller sent me this one. Since I plan to use it in my future video about Nicaragua, I decided not to replace the buttons. During winter, Soviet airborne troops typically wore either Ushanka hats or various civilian-style Soviet or foreigner ski hats. On this picture you see Adidas. And of course, the most iconic item of the Soviet paratrooper was the blue and white stripe Telnyashka. Moving on to the uniform, I am wearing an Afghanka. However, it is important to understand that at the beginning of the Afghan conflict, Soviet troops were issued with the hot climate uniform, which was also a summer airborne uniform. Despite the introduction of the Afghanka, the hot climate uniform continued to be used throughout the war, often appearing side by side with the Afghanka up until the very end. I already have a detailed video on this channel entirely dedicated to the Afghanka uniform, so if you're interested, go and watch that video. Here we will only list key points. And if you're interested in the hot climate uniforms or different variations of M1969 uniform, my friend Seva recently released the video on that topic as well, and you can find it using this link. Returning to the Afghanka, its first prototypes were tested by the 345th Parachute Regiment in Afghanistan in 1981 and 1982. The pre-production version had a sleeve pocket only on one sleeve, and a few other minor differences, which I have already covered in the other video, so go and check it out. The finalized technical specifications for the Afghanka were approved in 1982, and by 1984 it was officially adopted by the Soviet Army under the Order number 145 of the Minister of Defense. In 1985, mass production for the limited contingent of the Soviet forces in Afghanistan began. The same year, the Afghanka was already widely distributed in Afghanistan. However, in the Soviet Union, the uniform only became common by 1988, when the official wearing regulations were introduced. That is why many sources refer to it as M1988 or Type 1988 uniform. A similar situation occurred with the American M16 rifle. Although it was officially adopted in 1967, the majority of the US Army units in Vietnam were already using it by 1965. The same thing happened with modern Russian VKPO uniforms. The official wearing regulations were only approved in 2015, but the prototypes appeared as early as 2011. And by the way, we already have a video about this on my channel. And some units were even using them in Crimea in 2014. And it doesn't make it 2014 type uniform or 2011 type uniform. Anyway, the Afghanka was a very practical and advanced uniform for its time. In my other video, I concluded that in terms of cut, it was even better than the American M81 Woodland uniform. However, its biggest drawback, which was also partially an advantage, was the fabric. For Afghanistan's hot climate, this material is too heavy and thick. I heard the stories that people tried to cut off the pockets or cut out some openings to make it somewhat breathable, and tried to avoid wearing it in the summertime. But overall, this fabric is high quality and very durable. So in general, the Afghanka was very durable and comfortable. The fabric was just wrong for that particular environment, which was partially proved after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when lighter fabrics were introduced. And in winter, during the last years of the war, paratroopers wore the winter Afghanka uniform. Belts. Several types of belts were used. Soviet officers and warrant officers wore Soviet brown leather officer's belt. For enlisted personnel, there were three main options. The standard leather soldier's belt with the star, hammer and sickle buckle, so-called linoleum belt made of some unusual material unknown to me, and the canvas field belt, though it was not coated with the PVC enamel. Interestingly, PVC coated belts were mostly found among Afghan army troops. Footwear. From the beginning to the end of the war, despite the harsh mountain terrain, some soldiers continued to wear Soviet jackboots. However, combat ankle boots were also widely used. Among airborne troops, the most common type was so-called lightweight model. However, some other variations were also in use, including 1981 model boots, so-called Derevyashki, literally wooden boots, which you see here, the so-called Yolochki or Margelovki, originally developed for Soviet advisors stationed in hot climates, special mountain boots with metal cleats on the sole, and even some Czechoslovakian boots, but those were never issued officially. Additionally, some paratroopers wore Soviet or foreign running boots or sneakers, but first of all, if we are talking about scouts or special forces, those could even use them on the mission, while regular average airborne would probably use them only on the base or in some very rare situations outside the base. But we covered this in our other videos, so I don't really want to stop on this right now. Canteens. Soviet Airborne were issued two types of canteens. First, the Soviet aluminum canteen combined with the mess kit, but this one was mostly used on the base or carried in the backpack, because aluminum does not like sun, unless you want to boil your water. And also the plastic Soviet canteen with capacity of 1.5 liter. And this one was actually extremely popular, and sometimes people even carried two. But we already have a video about Soviet military canteens on this channel, where we are discussing these two, plus general issue one, and even comparing them with Cuban one. So go and watch that video. While scouts and special troops often carried civilian hiking backpacks, such as Yarov and Abalakov models, Paratroopers relate on the good old RD-54 backpack. A common modification was to cut off the lower pouches for grenades and magazines. Soldiers would either use these pouches to make custom chest rigs or sew them directly onto the backpack. Some scouts who needed more carrying capacity would even combine two RD-54 backpacks into one. Speaking of chest rigs, one of the most praised battlefield trophies for Shuravi was the Chinese Chicom chest rig. It was arguably the best chest rig of its time. It was loved by American troops in Vietnam, Rhodesian SAS operators. Even today it can still be found on the battlefields in the Middle East. Chicom is like an AK of chest rigs. Extremely simple, durable, and very comfortable. It was often called liftchik, bra, due to the way it fastens across the chest. It featured 3 central pouches designed to hold 1 AK magazine each, though with some adjustments 6 magazines could fit in total. And 4 smaller pouches, 3 for grenades and 1 rubberized pouch, which Soviet soldiers often used to carry bandages, though it was originally intended for an oil bottle. Those who couldn't get a Chicom rig often made their own custom load-bearing gear. Some soldiers cut magazine and grenade pouches from RD-54 backpack to create makeshift rigs, but it takes 2 RD-54s to make one rig like this. Similar designs were crafted using 2 standard Soviet magazine pouches and 2 rifle slings. By regulation, Soviet soldiers were issued the load-bearing belt system. However, this setup was incredibly uncomfortable and was nicknamed the Garland due to its bulky, impractical nature. The load-bearing system consisted of a field belt, canvas suspenders coated with brown PVC enamel, a 3 or 4 cell AK magazine pouch, a grenade pouch for 2 grenades, a canteen in a canteen cover, an entrenching tool, and additional gear such as the AZK hazmat suit, bayonet, half shelter, etc. In Afghanistan, the full load-bearing system was rarely used. Most soldiers just attached a basic 3 or 4 cell rifle magazine pouch to their belts. For RPK gunners, a large magazine pouch with a shoulder strap was issued. The SVD magazine pouch is quite practical. It has 4 pockets for rifle magazines, 1 smaller pocket on the flap for the cleaning kit, and even large compartment to store the PSO scope. The only downside of this pouch is that, while running, it bounces against the leg. That's why so many soldiers converted it into a chest rig by attaching 2 AK rifle slings. Around 1986-1987, first Soviet load-bearing vests and chest rigs started to appear in Afghanistan. The BVD vest, боевая выкладка десантника, or airborne load-bearing vest, and Poyas A chest rigs, which were nothing else than enhanced version of the Chinese Chicom. However, these were primarily available for the reconnaissance units and special forces, rather than the regular troops. Body armor. Although throughout the conflict almost all versions of the Soviet Army body armor vests could be seen, in very limited occasions 6B1, which was already pretty outdated vest, newly developed 6B2, 6B2 3T, 6B3, and in limited quantities even 6B4, the most common Soviet body armor vest with the pouches was 6B3, which is why I am using it for this video. Unlike 6B2 and 6B2 3T, which required either trophy or self-crafted chest rigs, the 6B3 already had a system of various pouches and compartments. 4 magazine pouches for a single AK magazine, chest pocket for additional gear like ROP flares, smoke grenades, S-Mark tourniquet, bandages, or radio. back pocket for a rain poncho or other equipment, plus 4 grenade pouches, 2 on each side. Notice no buttons on grenade pouches. Grenades were simply secured with a loop. The weakest part of the system was the side fastening made of nylon straps with eyelets, which tended to break off quickly. And the same issue applies to the shoulder adjustment straps. The vest also had loops for a specialized belt, or at least standard soldier's or officer's belt, for a tighter fit and carrying extra gear. Standard magazine pouch, grenade pouch, canteen, etc. Though I have never seen the belt with additional equipment on the 6B3 body armor vest used in Afghanistan. 6B3 was introduced in 1983 and there were 3 main variants over the years: 6B3T, 6B3TM, and 6B3TM01. It featured a nylon cover with aramid soft armor and titanium armor plates inside. The only differences were the types of the armor plates inside. The covers were always the same. Around 1990, the production of the canvas cover began. But during the Afghanistan war, only 6B3 vests with nylon covers were used. Now let's move on to helmets. The most common helmet among paratroopers during the Afghan war was the SSH-68. This was the most modern helmet of the Soviet army at that time, and it had a fairly comfortable suspension system. If you don't know how to adjust it, it can be very uncomfortable and it will bounce around your head, making you hate this. But if you know what you are doing and you adjust it properly, it can be even more comfortable than M1 helmet, which surprised me. And I am guilty as well. When I was studying in military school and in my ROTC in military academy, I didn't know how to adjust it properly, and I hated this helmet. But in reality, it turned out that I was wrong and it can be adjusted. In my defense, I will say that when I was a cadet, we only had a SSH-40 helmet, and since that one couldn't be adjusted as easy, I thought all subsequent Soviet helmets couldn't be adjusted either. But that's not true. Specifically, the SSH-60 and SSH-68 helmets can be adjusted to fit the soldier's head perfectly and sit just right. Now let's discuss other equipment. First of all, they used ROP and RSP, signal and lightning flares. Also, AKM and early AK-74 were issued with 6H4 bayonet, while later AK-74 rifles were issued with 6H5. The magazines for the AK-74 could be either orange or plum colored. Plum magazines began to be issued since around 1986. This material is often called bakelite. The official name, as far as I know, is textilite. And if you're talking about colors, the orange is nothing else than the original color of the material. In the Soviet Union, the telephones and radios were produced in this color because of the material itself. While plum magazine is actually Soviet attempt to make black color. They could not make a stable black color, so it turned to be plum. Next would be medicine, of course, Soviet bandage and S-mark tourniquet. Officers carried Makarov pistol in black leather holster. And of course, everybody used grenades. RGD-5, F1, or RGO and RGN. And of course, YouTube, this is not an original grenade, this is an airsoft grenade, as well as everything here is for airsoft. Firearms. Throughout the conflict, paratroopers primarily carried 545mm rifles. 7.62mm rifles, such as AKMS, were typically used by reconnaissance unit vanguards or special forces, who favored them for several reasons, main being the ability to attach suppressor. Speaking specifically about 545mm rifles, the standard airborne variant was the IKEA-74, featuring a folding skeleton stock. Soldiers often stored the field dressing inside the stock and wrapped the tourniquet around it. And the only reason to wrap the tourniquet around the stock is the temperature. In winter, it is extremely uncomfortable to touch cold steel stock with your cheek, as well as in Afghanistan summer. It's getting so hot, so you can burn your cheek with it, and even varnish on the wooden stock could melt. Some sources claim that another reason for having it around the stock is a quick access in case of emergency application, but I was trained with this thing. Stretch it few times and it will tear. Leave it under the tension under the sun, it will dry out and crack exactly when you need to apply it. So it is an extremely bad idea. And over the years, under my other videos, whenever the veterans of the Afghanistan war left their feedback, no one have ever confirmed that theory. But the bandage, yes, they carried the bandage inside the stock exactly for the quick access in case of an emergency. Another field modification was to wrap some insulating tape or better bandage around the steel parts of the rifle sling. Why bandage is better? Same reason, the sun. Glue on the insulating tape would be all over it. Additionally, paratroopers used GP-25 underbarrel grenade launchers, whoever was issued with one, RPKS-74 light machine guns, including night versions, PK and PKM general purpose machine guns, SVD Dragunov sniper rifles, Makarov pistols issued to officers and warrant officers, though rarely carried outside the base, RPG-7D grenade launchers, and rocket-propelled grenades such as RPG-18 and RPG-22. Now let's see how it all looks together. Well, you know the rest. A couple of years after the troops were withdrawn, the state they served collapsed. Today we live in difficult times when some veterans of Afghanistan fight others. Their fate turned out to be even more tragic than that of the American Vietnam veterans. But history remembers those who stood for their country. I hope you like this video, subscribe to my channel, put like, comment, share this video with your friends. If you want to help channel financially, links are in the description, and see you next time. Bye.